Hi there. Great to have you here. Let's start by clarifying what exactly we're designing. Could you tell me more about the type of booking system you have in mind? For example, is it for hotels, flights, event tickets, or something else? That'll help us set the right direction.
All right, so let's assume we're building something like Booking.com. If for this interview, let's just focus on hotels.
Perfect. That gives us a clear scope. So we're focusing on a hotel booking system, something like managing room availability, reservations, and cancellations. Let's start by identifying the main functional requirements. I'll propose one key requirement to begin. Users need to search for available hotels by location and dates. This is crucial because it's the starting point of any booking flow. Does that sound good as our first functional requirement?
Sounds great.
Great, we've got the first functional requirement on the board. Let's move on to the next key function. What do you think about adding the ability for users to view hotel details, such as room types and prices, once they've selected a hotel? Will that work as the next step?
Sure, let's go in detail a bit.
All right, let's break it down. The ability to view hotel details is important so users can make informed decisions. This would include information like room descriptions, pricing, amenities, and available dates. Without this, users wouldn't know what they're booking. Does adding a functional requirement for viewing detailed hotel information sound good to you?
Sounds great.
We've added that. Now we're building a solid list of core functions. Let's move on to the next main requirement. How about the ability for users to place a reservation for a selected room? That's the next logical step in the booking flow. Does that sound good as the next functional requirement?
Yeah, let's do that and then move to non-functional.
Great. We've got the core functional requirements in place. Now let's shift gears and focus on the non-functional requirements. We'll want to consider things like performance, availability, and expected traffic. Let's start with estimating the daily number of bookings. For example, we could estimate a few thousand bookings per day for a mid-sized hotel platform. Does that sound like a reasonable starting point for our traffic estimation?
Sure, let's start simple and we can talk about scale later.
Sounds good. Let's keep it simple for now. With a few thousand daily bookings, we can start to size our infrastructure and plan for latency and reliability. Next, let's consider a performance target, such as aiming for a maximum response time for searching and booking. Would a target of around 200 milliseconds for search responses sound like a good starting point?
Sure.
We've added that non-functional requirement. Next, let's think about availability. For a hotel booking system, downtime could mean lost reservations. Would aiming for something like 99.9% availability be a reasonable goal to start with?
Sure.
Great, we've got that added. Now we have a solid foundation of functional and non-functional requirements. Are you ready to move on to defining the core entities and data model?
Real quick, can you read the whiteboard to see if we're missing any non-functional requirements?
So far, we have two non-functional requirements listed: the search response time target of 200 milliseconds and the availability target of 99.9%. One important aspect we might still want to include is a rough estimate of the daily traffic volume, like the number of daily searches or bookings. That can help us plan for capacity and scaling. Should we add an estimation for daily search or booking volume next?
Sure.
All right, let's propose an estimate. For a mid-sized hotel booking platform, we might expect around 10,000 daily searches and maybe a few thousand daily bookings. This gives us a baseline to understand the load on the system. Does estimating around 10,000 daily searches sound like a good non-functional requirement to add?
Sure, let's go ahead with that.
We've added the estimated daily searches. This gives us a solid starting point for both functional and non-functional requirements. Now we're ready to move on to defining the core entities and data model. Let's take that next step.
All right, just walk me through your first one then.
Let's start with the most central entity, the hotel. The hotel entity is crucial because it holds all the key information about each property users can book. It will likely include fields like the hotel name, location, and a list of rooms. This entity is the backbone of the booking system. Does it make sense to start by defining the hotel entity and its basic attributes?
Sure, go ahead and add that to the whiteboard.
Let me break it down before adding it. The hotel entity will need attributes like the hotel name as a string, location, which could be a city or address, and a collection of rooms. We can keep it simple for now and expand later. Now that we've explained the key attributes, I'll go ahead and add the hotel entity to the whiteboard. We've added the hotel entity with its basic attributes. Let's continue by adding the next important entity. How about the room entity, which will represent individual rooms in the hotel?
Sure.
All right, let's break down the room entity before adding it. The room will need attributes such as the room type, like single, double, suite, price per night, and availability status. This will allow us to track which rooms can be booked at any given time. Does that sound like a good set of attributes for the room entity before we add it?
Sure.
We've now added the room entity with its key attributes. Let's keep building out the data model step by step. How about we move on to the reservation entity next, which
Sure.
will connect users to the rooms they book.
Sure.
All right, let's break down the reservation entity. It will need attributes like a reference to the room, the user who made the booking, the check-in and check-out dates, and the total price. This entity ties everything together for each booking. Once we have that, we'll be in a good place to start thinking about relationships between entities. Does that structure for the reservation entity sound good to you before we add it?
Yep, that sounds great.
We've successfully added the reservation entity with its attributes. Now that we have the core entities, hotel, room, and reservation, we can start mapping relationships between them. For instance, a hotel can have many rooms, and each reservation is linked to a specific room. Should we go ahead and define the relationships between these entities now?
Just go ahead and explain them real quick, and then let's move on after that.
Sure, let's explain them step by step. First, a hotel has a one-to-many relationship with rooms, meaning each hotel can have multiple rooms. Second, a room can have many reservations over time, but each reservation is linked to one specific room. Finally, each reservation also has a link to the user who made the booking, which we'll consider adding later. That covers the key relationships. Now we can move on to the next stage.
Do you think we should add the user first before we go, to the data model before we continue?
Good point. Yes, adding the user entity now would make sense because it's central to reservations. The user entity could include attributes like user ID, name, and contact details. Once we've defined that, we'll have all the core entities in place. So let's add the user entity now.
All right.
We now have the user entity added, and our core data model is in place. Next, we can focus on connecting these entities and finalizing the relationships between them. That will give us a complete picture of how everything ties together.
All right.
Great. Let's go ahead and define the relationships between these entities. We'll take them one at a time. First, let's focus on the relationship between hotel and room. Each hotel can have multiple rooms, so we'll want to link them. Once we've explained that, we'll add the connection on the whiteboard.
Okay, let's talk about the API request real quick as well.
Good idea. As we define the relationship between hotel and room, we should consider what kind of API requests will be needed. For example, when we retrieve hotel details, we might have an endpoint like get hotels:/ID to fetch all the rooms for a specific hotel. We'll tie that to the relationship. Does that approach, defining a GET request for rooms under a hotel, sound like a good starting point for the API design?
Yeah, let's go forward with that.
We've now connected the hotel to the room with the API endpoint. This shows how we'll retrieve rooms for a given hotel. Next, we can move on to defining the relationships between room and reservation and tie that into another API request. Ready to go ahead with that?
Sure.
Let's dive into that. A room can have multiple reservations over time, but each reservation is linked to one specific room. So we'll have a one-to-many relationship from room to reservation. We can expose this with an API endpoint like get rooms:/reservations to fetch all reservations for a specific room. Once that's clear, we'll add it to the whiteboard. Does that make sense as the next step?
Yep.
We've added the room to reservation connection along with the API endpoint. Now we've got a clear picture of how hotels, rooms, and reservations are linked. We can continue by adding the relationship between reservation and user next, and then we'll have the full data flow. Ready to connect reservation to user?
Sure.
All right, the reservation will have a one-to-one relationship with the user who made the booking. We can expose this with an endpoint like get reservations:/ID:user to fetch the user details for a specific reservation. Let's go ahead and add that connection to the whiteboard. Then we'll have the full set of relationships.
All right, go ahead.
We've now completed the key relationships and API endpoints between all the core entities. This gives us a solid high-level view of the data flow. Next, we can dive deeper into the components or look at how we'll handle scaling and bottlenecks as the next step. Where would you like to go from here?
Well, let's do the high-level design now. Does that sound good?
Yes, that sounds like the right next step. We'll start building out the high-level design by introducing the main components of our system, one at a time. Let's begin with the core component that handles hotel and room data. We'll likely need a central service that manages hotel and room information. How about we add a hotel service that will handle hotel listings, room details, and availability queries? That would be a good place to start.
Let's do it.
All right, let me explain the hotel service component. This service will be responsible for fetching hotel data, including hotel details and associated rooms. It will expose endpoints like the ones we discussed, such as getting rooms for a specific hotel. It might connect to a database storing hotel and room information. Once we have that clear, we'll add it to the whiteboard as part of the high-level design. Does that explanation make sense before we add the hotel service component?
Yeah, go ahead and do that.
We've added the hotel service to the high-level design. Next, we can connect it to the relevant entities or add another crucial component, like a room service or a reservation service. This will help us build out the full system step by step. Which component would you like to focus on next?
What do you think we should do in your perspective?
From my perspective, the next logical step would be to add a reservation service. This service would handle creating, updating, and retrieving reservations. It's crucial because it ties together rooms and users, and it ensures that bookings are properly managed. Once we have that in place, we can connect it to the hotel service and the data model. So, I'd recommend adding the reservation service next. Does that sound like a good direction?
Yep.
We now have the reservation service added to the high-level design. Next, we can connect it to the reservation entity and define the key API interactions it will support, like creating and retrieving reservations. Once we've explained that, we'll add those connections. Are you ready to define how the reservation service will interact with the data model?
Sure.
Great. Let's break it down. The reservation service will interact with the reservation entity by supporting operations like creating a new reservation and retrieving reservation details. For example, we could have a post/reservations endpoint to create a reservation and a get reservations:/ID endpoint to fetch an existing one. That way, the reservation service ties into the reservation entity in a clear and functional way. Does that structure sound good before we add the connections?
Sure, one more thing, just to note, you can also use some of the other components like the server. I think that would be a better representation here, like rather than these rectangles as well for the service.
That's a great point. We can definitely represent these services more accurately as server components to reflect their role in handling requests. This will help keep the high-level design clear and closer to how the system will look in reality. So, when we add the connections, we'll treat them as services or servers. Let's go ahead and add the reservation service connections now. First, we'll connect it to the reservation entity with a post/reservations endpoint. Does that sound good to proceed?
Sure, let's get into that.
We've now connected the reservation service to the reservation entity with the post endpoint. This shows how new reservations will be created. Next, we can add another endpoint for retrieving reservations, like a get reservations:/ID call. That will complete the core interactions for this service. Are you ready to proceed with that next connection?
Sure, but like what will it actually do? Like how will it actually return stuff?
That's a great question. Let's walk through it. When the reservation service receives a get reservations:/ID request, it will query the data store to find the reservation by its ID. It will retrieve details such as the room, user, check-in and check-out dates, and the total price. The service will then return that data as a response in a structured format, like JSON. It might also call the user service to get user details if needed. So it acts as a coordinator, pulling together all the relevant information for that reservation. Does that clarify how it will actually return the data?
Yeah, that's good.
Great. Now that we've clarified how the reservation service will return data, let's go ahead and add that get endpoint connection. We'll connect the reservation service to the reservation entity with a label like get reservations:/ID.
All right.
We've successfully added the get endpoint connection from the reservation service to the reservation entity. Now the service can both create and retrieve reservations. We're building out the high-level design step by step. Next, we could focus on connecting the hotel service to the hotel entity or introduce another key component, like a room service. Which direction would you like to go next?
Go ahead and connect the hotel and we'll discuss from there.
Let's do that. We'll connect the hotel service to the hotel entity. This will handle fetching hotel details. We'll use a get hotels:/ID endpoint for retrieving a specific hotel's information. Once we have that in place, we'll have a more complete picture of our services interacting with the data model. Let's add that connection now.
All right.
We've now connected the hotel service to the hotel entity with the GET endpoint. This gives us a solid foundation for fetching hotel data. Now that we've connected the hotel service to the hotel entity, we've got a solid foundation for our high-level design. The hotel service handles hotel and room data, and the reservation service manages bookings. We've also defined the key API interactions for both. Next, we can either add a room service to handle room-specific operations, or start thinking about scaling considerations and potential bottlenecks.
Okay. Sorry. Now that we have the all the back or a good chunk of the back end, let's focus on how the user can interact with this. So can you walk me through that?
Absolutely. Let's walk through how the user interacts with the system step by step. The user will typically start by searching for available hotels. For that, we'll need an entry point, a front end or an API gateway that sends a request to the hotel service. The hotel service will handle the search query, using the parameters like location and dates, and return a list of matching hotels. Then, the user can select a hotel and view its details, including available rooms, by triggering another request. Each step involves the front end interacting with these back-end services. Does that flow make sense as the high-level user interaction so far?
Sure.
Great. We've outlined the user flow for searching and viewing hotel details. The next key interaction is when the user selects a room and wants to place a reservation. That's where the reservation service comes in, handling the booking process. We'll tie that into the flow next, showing how the front end will interact with the reservation service. Then we'll have a complete picture of the main user interactions.
All right, go ahead and add the user to the whiteboard and like the API gateway that you discussed.
Let's do that step by step. We'll start by adding the user as a component to represent the end user interacting with the system. After that, we'll add the API gateway to show how the user's requests flow into the back-end services. Let's start by adding the user component.
Yep, let's do it.
We've added the user component to represent the end user. Next, we'll add the API gateway, which will act as the entry point for the user's requests before they reach the hotel or reservation services. Once that's in place, we'll connect the user to the gateway. Let's add that API gateway now.
All right.
We've added the API gateway and connected it to the user. We've also connected it to the hotel service and reservation service to show how requests will flow. Now we have a clear picture of how the user interacts with the system. We can refine this further by detailing specific user actions, like searching for hotels or placing a reservation, and showing how they map to the endpoints we've defined. Does that make sense as the next step?
Let's rather do some discussion of the scalability of the system actually before, because I think we have a pretty good understanding now of the flow of information.
That makes a lot of sense. We've got a solid foundation of the flow, so shifting to scalability is a great next step. We'll want to discuss potential bottlenecks, like how the hotel service or reservation service can handle increasing traffic. We can dive into strategies like load balancing, caching layers for frequently accessed data, or even database sharding. Let's start by identifying what we think might be the first bottleneck as traffic scales. Would you say the search functionality might be the first area to focus on for scalability?